From the headquarters of Telesa English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Emika Omolu. Welcome. Venezuela has condemned the nations that met in Quito, Ecuador to discuss the situation of Venezuelan migrants. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez accused the Lima Group of stirring up xenophobia against Venezuelans.
We express our concern and rejection of any kind of biased and political manipulation with the immigration issue of Venezuela, as we have already denounced with verified and specific numbers. Today, a failed meeting took place in Quito with governments of the Lima Group. In that meeting, they deliberated over aspects that have nothing to do with the reality of Venezuelan voluntary migratory flows. Venezuelans that each time they gather outside of our embassies to ask for the return to Venezuela. In addition, the President of the Republic has asked that the Foreign Minister immediately present a formal protest through diplomatic means to this meeting that promotes a campaign of xenophobia against Venezuelans, promoting campaigns that denigrate and attack the integrity of Venezuelans. The state will be firm in defending our people around the world.
The two-day meeting held by 11 countries called for increased funding to cope with migrants leaving Venezuela. The final declaration referred to a humanitarian crisis driving the migration. Most of the Lima Group took part in the meeting, as they have repeatedly tried to coordinate regional action against Venezuela. Hundreds of Venezuelan migrants in Peru have registered for the Return to the Homeland plan, a plan launched by President Nicolas Maduro to help Venezuelans facing abuse outside their country.
Angela and Luciana have been in Lima for 2 months. During all this time, they found no work. They spend most of their time here, in this room, which they share with 4 other Venezuelans. But now they want to return to their country and leave behind the memory of the nights spent in this little mattress on the floor, the lack of medical assistance for Luciana's pregnancy and xenophobia.
She hasn't seen a doctor. We walk in the streets selling coffee or chocolate and people tell us things like, go back to your country, or this is our country, not yours. They even got to physically assault us.
Just like them, hundreds of Venezuelans living in Peru look to follow the Back to Our Country plan after not being able to find a better life in Peru, as they were told.
I work in a factory on Torres Avenue, and the boss used to tell me that we must leave 2 hours later because we were Venezuelans and not Peruvians.
She used to get angry when I complained about 30 soles a day. I used to earn after working from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Some women say that they were not only victims of labor exploitation, but also of sexual harassment or people trafficking.
They used to make web announcements looking for a hostess or customer service staff, but then it turned out that they needed us to be escorts or prostitutes.
Among Venezuelans who look to return to their country, there are a few that were considered refugees. Some of them suffer of serious illness and feel abandoned.
I wasn't able to have a roof of my own, nor a job, even medical attention for the condition from which I suffer. This has been completely worthless.
The second flight of the Back to Our Country plan will be leaving from Lima to Caracas on Saturday, September 8th. In the meantime, Venezuelan keeps attending their embassy to register for this plan.
Well, the government's fuel protection plan has started along the border with Colombia. New devices are being used to make sure fuel is no longer stolen.
Across the Venezuelan border with Colombia, a new device is being installed in gas stations. This is so that citizens can securely fuel their cars with subsidized petrol. The device recognizes a person's fingerprint to make sure they have registered for the subsidy.
Let's hope this works, and that it works quickly.
This is one of 315 gas stations that will be using the new system. There's still some confusion as to how it will work, but it will be rolled out over the next 2 weeks. Citizens must provide their homeland card and then place their fingerprint on the device so workers know they are eligible for the subsidised prices. If it's the first time, the client doesn't pay anything.
It is good that they have implemented the system on the border. It will reduce lines that were eternal before. We will be saving a lot of time.
In the country with the world's cheapest fuel, which sells for less than a cent of a dollar per litre, contraband is a huge issue. Neighbouring countries steal nearly $10 million worth of fuel every year. Do you think this system will put an end to fuel smuggling?
I surely hope so. Smuggling has cost this country too much.
With the new measure, the government hopes to put an end to fuel smuggling, particularly in the border town of Táchira, where 70% of the contraband heading to Colombia leaves the country.
I think this could work, but it will be difficult.
All Venezuelans have the right to subscribe to the new subsidy program. Whoever refuses to subscribe before October will have to pay international prices for fuel.
And in Colombia, the Energy Ministry has announced an increase in fuel prices. Gas will rise by 36 pesos, or about 1 US cent per gallon in most major cities, while motor oil will rise by 101 pesos, about 3 cents US. The ministry says this is due to the ongoing rise of international fuel prices. The cities to be most affected by this change will be Cali, Bogota and Medellin. Almost 2 years after the signing of a peace accord between the Colombian government and the FARC, Cuba has pledged 1,000 medical scholarships to underprivileged Colombians, including former members of FARC.
A second group of medical scholarship beneficiaries were seen off Tuesday by several officials, including FARC President Rodrigo Londoño, to fulfill an offer from the Cuban government, which was initially made during the Colombian peace talks.
It is a gesture for the construction of peace in Colombia. The Cuban government granted young Colombians 1,000 scholarships, 500 for the FARC and 500 for the government. We are now sending off the second contingent of 147 to join the 186 who are already there.
According to the Cuban embassy, the scholarships are granted to former combatants and any Colombian young person from deprived backgrounds.
The students come from different social backgrounds. There are 22 former combatants, 13 indigenous people, Afro-Colombian students, young people from social movements, young people coming from zones affected by conflict, children of former military officials, and a former police officer.
For Haiti, a former FARC combatant for 17 years and a victim of the armed conflict as a child, studying medicine is not only a personal achievement, but also a step forward for the Colombian people.
I like the social work. I am going to study medicine because there is a big health problem in Colombia. The FARC has the same objective of working for society. We are going to study not for personal gain, but to come back to Colombia and say, come here. There are a lot of people here who need health care.
Mauricio, one of the victims of the armed conflict, says the peace accord enables the building of a new country and calls on President Duque to support the peace process.
I represent the Colombian countryside, where the state comes with glyphosate. I prefer this peace process that saves lives and enables us to be physicians, to help people. President Duque, peace is not made with glyphosate, but by protecting lives, this is what the peace process means.
Next Friday, family members of former military officials, a police officer, along with others, will travel to Cuba to fulfill their dreams of becoming doctors.
Argentina says it hopes the International Monetary Fund will agree to an improved bailout loan in the second half of September. The Argentine Finance Minister, Nicolás de Hovny, met the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, in Washington on Tuesday. They were expected to talk about new conditions for the fund to speed up payments on a $50 billion deal. But de Hovny was unable to provide many details.
Well, I'm unable to give a time frame. I can't do that today. We intend for it to be discussed with the board that will be formed in the second half of September. There has to be a technical agreement before that happens. But that will take a few days because it has to go through several fund departments. As much as we achieve agreements on each of the topics we are discussing, this all requires a formal process to finally have a staff agreement, and so it can be taken to the directive board.
President Mauricio Macri has been accused of abusing power over the agreement he signed with the IMF. Macri and his ministers are accused of violating the constitution by not seeking congressional approval for the loan. The state prosecutor presented the case in court and said that it's now up to the judiciary to rule if it will suspend the agreement with the IMF. President Macri, meanwhile, says he is confident that his plan will stabilize Argentina's economy.
I'm clear about the way to get out of this storm and stabilize the macroeconomy. We're working on that. Approve a balanced budget, add a new agreement with the IMF, and with the sum of those two things, put the certainty of the financial program of the Argentine state in 2019. Then we have to retake external funding to resume the path of investment that we had strongly started in 2017. That's the only way. We don't have another one.
Time for a short break, but stay with us.
We are African. Culture and tradition is what we are born with. We might be apart in terms of distance, but we are always together. We need to love ourselves. Back to Africa.
Sunday, only on Telesur.
Queremos verdad, reparación integral, pero sobre todo justicia, pero justicia social.
How many ways there are to tell a story? The different perspectives of our nations are on Telesur documentaries. Sundays, only on Telesur.
Good to have you back. Parents of the 43 missing Ayotzinapa students didn't get the news they were looking for after a meeting with President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador. The Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, along with the victims' families, have asked for the creation of a truth commission, but the government has again denied them. The International Human Rights Commission will present a report on the government's work in November. The students have been missing since 2014, with those responsible still at large. The number of Mexicans deported from the United States has increased significantly, causing unemployment to rise and putting pressure on social services.
For the past 5 years, Octavio Cruz has lived in Los Angeles, United States. However, the fear of being deported and the increase in immigration arrests forced him to return to Mexico.
They told me that the officers from ICE detained them and locked them in a prison, and they were treated like criminals. They were in a cell with a uniform, and many times they were forced to sign deportation papers.
Official figures show that in the first half of 2018, more than 109,000 Mexicans were deported from the US, a 42% increase over the same period last year.
As we always say, this is a humanitarian crisis. Now, the U.S. Citizen Services Office is working directly with the ICE. They summon people, making them think that they are going to their residency appointment, and at that moment, they are arrested and placed for deportation.
The profile of deportees have changed. Nowadays, both those who have recently crossed the border without papers and those who have been living in the US for years are being detained.
Many of us feel like we are in limbo, because in the US we were discriminated for being Hispanic. But when we return to our country, there is also discrimination because of the way we talk, dress, our tattoos, haircut, because we don't speak Spanish very well.
Mexico's president-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador promises to improve economic conditions to reduce the number of Mexicans who migrate.
For the new government that President López Obrador will lead, migrants are not criminals or offenders. We have to shift the approach. The person who migrates is someone who needs to move, whatever the reason.
Despite dialogue between the transitional government and Washington, US President Donald Trump has maintained his stance on building a wall, even threatening to shut down the US government if funding is denied.
The UN has urged Guatemala's leadership to transfer the responsibilities of the International Commission Against Impunity to national institutions. President Jimmy Morales expelled the UN mission over the weekend. The UN says this latest move is a setback in targeting criminal networks in the country. Our correspondent in Guatemala City, Mario Rosales, brings us more.
Repercusiones han habido en todas las esferas políticas en torno a esta decisión.
The Guatemalan government is facing political repercussions because the president, Jimmy Morales, denied entrance to the country to Iván Velázquez, head of the International Commission Against Impunity. The political storm started on Friday when Morales decided not to renew the ruling of the commission. Now, immigration services are under instructions to not allow the entrance of Velázquez through any route. This latest decision has led to requests of safe harbor for Velázquez. Lawmakers believe that President Morales is breaking constitutional law with this ruling. The court last year ruled that the commission could work in the country and demanded Morales stop acting against both the commission and Velázquez. The debate has turned to whether the president is disobeying a direct order from the Constitutional Court, which is considered a crime in Guatemala. The Constitutional Court must now decide if they will allow another protection order for Velázquez and the commission.
Mario Rosales reporting there. The president of Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado, agreed to meet union leaders as long as they cancel their strike. Unions are planning an indefinite general strike to start on Monday. Alvarado sent a letter to unions asking them to be conscious of the country's critical situation. He also asked for their support for a plan seeking to strengthen public finances, which is the basis for a fiscal reform of the country. Unions had previously asked Alvarado to meet with them on September 10 to discuss their demands. Trinidad and Tobago's education minister is threatening teachers with legal action if they take part in Friday's national strike. Multiple unions are banding together to protest increasing job loss and stagnant wages. However, Education Minister Anthony Garcia says teachers are considered an essential service. Therefore, they are prohibited from taking any industrial action.
Section 69 of the Industrial Relations Act prohibits members of the teaching service from taking part in industrial action. Any member of the teaching service who takes part in industrial action in contravention of Section 69 of the Act is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $500 and to imprisonment for 3 months.
The unions are planning counter lawsuits if the government takes action against any worker who joins the strike. The leader of the country's largest union says workers are within their rights if they simply take a sick day. The unions have a meeting with the Prime Minister on Thursday, possibly to stave off the strike.
We will not hesitate to bring you before the magistrate court or any single permanent secretary or any single head of department or anyone who is acting on behalf of the employer who believe they can jail, fine, or penalize anyone for taking 1 day sick leave. As a matter of fact, the law is clear. You do not have to supply a medical paper or give any evidence that you were sick if you take 1 day off.
Students and teachers in St. Martin are returning to school 1 year after Hurricane Irma wreaked havoc on the island. But all isn't normal. There are significantly less students. Many families left the island after Irma, and the teachers' union is threatening strike action. The union worries that classrooms aren't physically ready for the new student intake. 20 schools were badly damaged, 3 of them entirely destroyed.
Premises are still devastated. That is to say, they have not been repaired. So overall, there are still rooms that are operational, but for example, where I teach, buildings are still destroyed. The workshops are destroyed, they're still not repaired because there are complex procedures and funding requests that are pending. We find ourselves 1 year later without a premises.
Time for another short break. See you soon.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome. China-Africa relations are at their best ever, according to Chinese President Xi Jinping. One of the main points at the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation was China's $60 billion finance plan for African countries. Isora Diaz has more details from Beijing.
China's president announced 8 action plans by the Asian giant with a financial package of $60 billion to strengthen its link with Africa in the framework of South-South cooperation over the next 3 years. The measures cover the development of industry, improved connections between infrastructure, and an increase in the imports of African products to China, especially of finished products rather than just raw material. He also wants to strengthen healthcare and peace measures on the continent. Xi Jinping repeated that the links between China and Africa are based on mutual respect and the development of equality without prior conditions of any kind and without pursuing political interests in Africa. In the same way, he said there needed to be synergy between the development strategies of Africa, the African continent, to find common goals between the Belt and Road Initiative and the African Union's development agenda for the year 2063. Of course, the Chinese president again defended multilateralism, free trade, and an inclusive open economy. And he criticised protectionism and unilateralism. For his part, the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, who was chairing the China-Africa Cooperation Forum, praised the success of the forum over the last 18 years since it was founded and rejected the comments of some countries that say this relationship between China and Africa is a new type of colonialization. Cyril Ramaphosa says that Africa has an inalienable right to decide its own future and that this forum has contributed to a peaceful, integrated, developing continent led by Africans themselves. Ramaphosa welcomed President Xi's initiatives along with other projects linked to the Belt and Road Initiative because they encouraged the building of much-needed infrastructure in Africa. The South African president also supported the aim of rebalancing trade between China and Africa, because currently most of this is based on the export of raw materials from Africa and then the importing of finished products from China. The summit ended with a call to encourage youth development and the protection of human resources.
Zora Diaz in Beijing there. Typhoon Jebi continues to wreak havoc in Japan. Here's more on that and a look at some other stories from around the world.
Typhoon Jebi in Japan has killed 10 people. It's the most powerful storm the country has faced in decades. An airport company had to transport around 3,000 stranded travellers by boats due to flooding. It's not known when the airport will reopen. Some roads and train lines remain closed. Hundreds of Syrian refugees made their way back to their homes from Lebanon on Tuesday. Busloads of people were taken to Homs, Damascus and Hama provinces. One passenger said that he's been away from his home for 7 to 8 years.
My name is Israel Safadi. I am returning to my country. I am very happy. I spent 6 years here and I'm very glad that I am coming back to my country again.
A 9-year-old girl has been found dead after being gang raped in Indian-administered Kashmir. Police have arrested 6 people in connection with the murder, including the girl's stepmother. According to officials, the stepmother had asked her son and 3 others to rape the victim. The girl had been her father's favourite, which allegedly caused a rift in the family. She was missing for 10 days before her body was found in a jungle, showing signs of torture, including being burnt with acid. This is the latest incident in a series of rapes and sexual violence in India.
The first African-American woman has been elected as representative of the states of Massachusetts in Congress. Ayanna Presley is a Boston City councillor who secured the Democratic nomination, beating 10-term Representative Michael Capano. This year has seen a historic number of female candidates run for office in the Democratic Party. Minority candidates are rising through the ranks.
And now is the time to be bold. Bold with our ideas.
And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for Telesur English. I'm Emiko Molu, and thank you again for watching.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life